monsters. Thank you for joining us for another podcast episode / weekly cult meeting. I'm Angelina, and I'm hanging out with my sinister sister, Aurora.
Hey, friends. Have you ever noticed how perfect cults always sound before the big twist in the documentary? Us too. That's what inspired us to start a cult where the only spooky twists are in our Wednesday Addams braids. If you've ever wanted to get away from the world with some baby animals and some fellow weirdos and tell murder stories around a roaring campfire, the Monster Commune is for you. To become an official member today, just head over to patreon.com/MurderMurder.news so you can get your own flashy title like Grandmaster of Goats, a shout out on the show, and exclusive access to our regular patron-only content.
We just posted the Patreon exclusive video episode for July this past weekend. It's all about the willfully missing and the legality of disappearing on purpose. If that's something you've been curious about, you'll want to make sure you're a patron so you can check it out. So Aurora, how's your week going?
It's going great so far.
Cool.
Had some fun Vancouver Pride this weekend. Had the day off yesterday. Went on a hike where I spent a lot of time thinking about what if I went missing, and I'm like taking a picture on my phone. I'm like, what if this is the last picture on my phone?
I wonder if anyone's ever thought that while it actually wound up being like that, or if like somehow just like anticipating it as a safeguard on its own, you know?
And it's interesting because like I think our instincts do play somewhat of a role in these things sometimes. Like I'm reminded of one of the victims of I can't think of his name. He's the Tinder killer, serial killer that we covered a little while back. And his last victim, Sarah, they had exchanged messages, and she was the one that's like, "You're not a serial killer, are you?"
Oh yeah.
And it's like you think that like in saying that you're making yourself safe. Like I can gauge this person's reaction. Like if he doesn't respond with a like,
but even if he is a
comment,
serial killer, he'll be like, haha, no.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes like your mind is just telling you what's about to happen. And sometimes you just have intense crippling anxiety like me.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is what kills me because like people are always trust your gut. And I'm like, hey, my gut, you don't want to know what my gut is thinking because like being so immersed in true crime, it's like I'm always like I have the top 10 worst case scenarios on my mind all the time. And 99% of the time, those don't happen. But that's my gut because I have crippling anxiety.
Right.
So
intense.
I have to like push through my gut, but
absolutely
probably won't get murdered. So far, I haven't been murdered on any hikes or any camps, even though those do seem like dangerous things the more we talk about them.
Like all the time. And I used to enjoy it so much as a kid. Like my favorite thing was hiking and going camping. And now I can't help but wonder in that direction sometimes.
Yeah. Like my mind wanders in ways that like it's not even warranted. Like I don't have kids, but I do. Like the other day I was up in the night thinking about how if I did have kids, they would be pissed at me because I'd be like, you're never going camping.
Yeah.
You're not going to day camp. You're not sleeping over at a friend's house. No.
You will be staying right here in this earthquake, fireproof home.
This is why I have cats. They're a lot easier to keep inside. But
so true. Well, let's kick off today's episode with a look at some of the true crime stories that made headlines this week.
At 11:40 a.m. last Sunday, police were dispatched to the 2200 block of the Medical District in Dallas, Texas. There, they discovered a large quantity of blood and a trail leading away from a nearby apartment. At the same time, a man and woman were found to be suffering from gunshot wounds inside a car parked outside of a local hospital. Police identified the man as 26-year-old Byron Redman, but the identity of the woman has not been released. A preliminary investigation suggests that Redman shot the woman in the neck during a domestic dispute. The bullet then exited the woman's neck and hit the shooter in the leg. Byron Redman was pronounced dead in hospital. The unidentified woman was treated and released and is on the road to recovery.
This week, a wealthy American dentist and big game hunter was found guilty of murdering his wife on safari in Africa back in 2016. 67-year-old Lawrence Rudolph maintains his innocence in the shooting death and says he believes the gun went off accidentally as his wife was placing it in its case. Several damning details were presented in court, including the fact that Rudolph scheduled his wife's cremation just 3 days after her death in what seems like an attempt to destroy evidence. He also received life insurance payouts of over $4.8 million following the death of his wife. In addition to the murder charge, Lawrence Rudolph was found guilty of mail fraud. His girlfriend, Lori Milliron, was convicted of being an accessory, obstruction of justice, and 2 counts of perjury. We also have a small sort of developing update on the case we presented last week, which is Jackie Reyes is missing. So as you all might be aware, Jackie has been missing from Boynton Beach since June 2nd, and her family came on to talk about her disappearance. And, basically it's just this big, vague puzzle at this time. Her cell phone has not been used. There's a lot of missing pieces. But according to police, they just let her family know this weekend that there was a sighting of somebody that may be Jackie at a convenience store. We think it's Florida, but we're not 100% sure where she was spotted. Looking at the surveillance pictures that we have seen, it does look like it could be her. So it's possible that she has decided to walk away and not be in communication with her family. It's also possible this isn't her. It's also possible she's being held against her will. So there's still a lot of questions here. And if you have any information about where she might be at this point, we really encourage you to step up. Police have let her family know that if Jackie isn't in danger, and if this is her and she's just walked away, that they can't divulge any information about her whereabouts. They have to protect her, her safety as an adult. So if you have information about her and you've been withholding it because she doesn't want to be in contact with her family for whatever reason, and we don't know that's the case, then please do come forward, because they will just let her family know that she's safe, and that's really what they want. Yeah, so they can move on. Yeah,
they just want to close the case.
Exactly. So it's really important to come forward if you do have information. And we are hoping that Jackie is safe and that everything's okay.
We'll be right back after a quick commercial break from one of our fellow Darkcast podcasts.
Hello, twisted humans. Do you find yourself wanting to know more about the latest murder, conspiracy, cults, or haunting? Then this is the podcast for you. We're bringing the most intense stories that'll keep you up at night. He was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and felonious assault, but he was only sentenced to 5 months of probation, and this would be the last time that anyone ever saw Fiona. There are allegedly 2 women who also drowned in the first-class pool.
Was this the same glowing green that they'd seen in the darkness the night before?
He had refused to sit near the wagon cloth because of stains on it, which were most likely blood. Join us every Tuesday for a glass of wine or sangria and a dose of true crime. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sierra. And this is
Twisted and Uncorked.
And we're back. Before we dig in, we want to offer a quick disclaimer. Though we joke about forming a true crime cult, that is not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, and we want you to know that we take the cases we're discussing very seriously.
We want to deliver each story with the utmost respect to victims and anyone involved. If you feel we've missed the mark, you don't like our tone, or if you notice we've gotten any details wrong, let us know with a quick email to murdermurdernews@gmail.com and we'll make it right. Some specific trigger warnings for this episode include gun violence, domestic abuse, child murder, and suicide. If any of those subjects are particularly sensitive for you, you may want to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead.
The part of true crime history we're digging into this week brings us back to the summer of 1999. July 29th was a Thursday, and the state of Georgia was sweating through a record heat wave. The day started like any other for the community of day traders working in the uptown Atlanta area of Buckhead. Mark Barton showed up to work at Momentum Securities around 11:30 a.m. Encountering a coworker named Rick, Barton offered to light a cigarette and asked Rick if he was, quote, sticking around for the bloodbath. Trading is tooth and nail, and it was already a particularly rough trading day, which Rick assumed Mark was alluding to. A former training supervisor named Brent Doonan described Mark as a happy-go-lucky guy in khaki shorts. Colleagues also knew of him as a risk-taker and a cocky trader who often wound up in trouble but always found a way out of it. Mark posed as a seasoned trader and started taking a high volume of high-risk trades right out of the gate. He fronted as a wealthy guy who got a thrill out of the game but had plenty of cash to cover his ass should he fail. In reality, he was in way over his head. He had used up all of his resources getting out of trouble, and in the summer of '99, he found himself deeper in debt than he had ever been. That afternoon, Barton had an appointment with a manager at Momentum. In a spiel heard a handful of times around the office, he'd claimed that after a bit of a rough patch, which left him barred from making any trades, a windfall brought him enough money to pay off his debts and put $50,000 back into his Momentum account. Manager Justin Hogan agreed that if he wired him the money, Mark could start trading again.
Waiting impatiently for Justin to arrive for their meeting, Mark chatted with the other traders for half an hour or so. Next, he sauntered into the break room, growing impatient. There he met 36-year-old branch manager Kevin Dial. Quote, "It's a bad trading day, but it's about to get worse," Barton opened. Looking up in acknowledgement, Kevin was met with Barton's two guns, a Colt 45 automatic and a Glock 9mm, and received fatal shots to the heart and lungs. The entire floor erupted into total chaos, with folks running in every direction, trying to escape, as Barton opened fire on his colleagues. Andrew Zaparzala and James Jordan were hit next. A bullet shattered Andrew's rib cage and was subsequently lodged inside of his body. After falling to the floor, James scrambled towards the exit and was shot a second time in the arm on his way out. Justin Hogan arrived at the office a bit late for his meeting with Mark Barton, and just as he was walking in, collided with an injured and exasperated James Jordan fleeing the building. Jordan explained what was happening as the two hurried away together from the building and towards safety.
Barton shot two men in Scott Webb's office. 30-year-old Webb's lung was punctured and a bullet lodged in his chest, killing him. His associate was shot in the back and shoulder. A bullet grazed the receptionist's shoulder. 42-year-old Russell Brown was shot 3 times across the trading floor and died instantly. Mark shot the computer monitor at his former workstation. He shot 58-year-old Edward Quinn in the neck, severing his jugular vein. Quinn died of blood loss on the trading floor. Employees began barricading themselves inside of offices with desks and filing cabinets. Several made calls to 911. Callers were able to describe the gunmen, the victims, and their injuries, and narrate the scenes of terror that were still unfolding before them to 911 dispatchers. A small group combined their efforts to launch a computer tower through an office window, breaking the glass. It was too high to jump to safety, but they were able to throw stacks of paper from the window, alerting authorities to their location.
Meanwhile, Barton silently slipped out of the back of the building, crossed Piedmont Road, and entered the office building of All Tech Investments, where he used to trade. A few months prior, Barton told supervisor Brent Doonan that he was going back to work in his former field of chemistry, when really he just went across the street to trade at Momentum. He told Brent he'd surely turn up another invention to help get him back on his feet. He had a similar reputation at both firms of trading recklessly, being shockingly nonchalant about huge losses and somehow always landing on his feet. Earlier that spring, Barton had returned from a short break after incurring an $11,000 debt with the company and told Doonan he made a killing after inventing a new kind of soap. He paid his debts and got back into the trading game. By the time he walked out in '99, he owed Alltech $30,000. In just a month at Momentum, Mark's reckless trading habits had racked him up to $100,000 in debt. Barton regained his earlier composure and poked his head into Brent's office. He went in a meeting with a new trader, but Mark said it was important and that he would wait. He got himself a soda and chatted up the traders for a while. Peevish, he paced the conference room floor and tried to coax Brent out by saying, "Come out here quick. You're really going to love this." Brent assumed Mark was there to pay his debt. He came out to collect Barton, and the two walked together into one of the manager's offices, where two colleagues named Kathy and Scott were already working.
"What has you so eager to meet with me?" Brent asked. Mark responded by brandishing two handguns. With the first gun, he shot Brent through the abdomen, piercing several organs. The shot from Barton's second gun hit him in the arm. Kathy Van Camp was shot through the temples, piercing her brain, but astonishingly, she survived. She did, however, lose her senses of taste, smell, and sight. Scott was shot in the abdomen and wrist. Mark stepped out of the office and into another chaotic scene of scared traders scrambling to escape his wrath. Quote, "I hope this doesn't ruin your trading day," he bellowed, before shooting 44-year-old Jamshid Habash in the back, killing him. A shot hit 54-year-old Frank Herder in the back. The man survived the attack, but as an aside, Fred suffered from PTSD from the incident and would ultimately take his own life in 2002. 48-year-old Alan Tenenbaum was shot in the back as he hid under his desk. 52-year-old Dean Delawala was shot in the back as he ran for the exit. Amazingly, though the bullet entered his back, it traveled up through his body and ultimately exited through his skull above his left eye. That felt worth mentioning because it was probably the most horrendous gunshot wound I've ever heard described. The bullet actually made a brief exit through the man's chest, but then went back into his body via the throat and then out again through the head. The man did not survive. Even still, Mark wanted to get another shot in, and he shot him once more in the right buttock. Barton killed 60-year-old Joseph Desert at his workstation, with a gunshot through the arm and another through the chest. He hit Harry Higginbotham in the head and Sang Yoon in the arm. He shot through a cubicle partition wall and hit 22-year-old Meredith Winnett in the back. Brent, still alive and hiding in the office, allegedly made a run for it only when it also served as a distraction from Barton murdering a woman point blank. He charged at Mark, knocked him off his feet, then fled. In the scuffle, Mark was able to deliver 2 more shots to Brent's left arm, but he did escape with his life. 44-year-old Vadawati Muralidhara was shot through the head in the elevator room as she tried to slip away from the scene.
911 operators were getting calls from both crime scenes, but with the similar settings and similar addresses, the whole thing was clouded with confusion. Dispatchers kept telling callers from Alltech that help was on the way, but really emergency vehicles were only being dispatched to Momentum. Officers secured that building and tried to snare their subject after hearing that callers kept claiming he was still inside. Those callers had actually been at Alltech, where Barton had been while all eyes were on Momentum. The smokescreen allowed him to scurry into the woods unobserved, or so he thought. One officer was arriving on the scene at Momentum when he could have sworn he heard gunfire coming from the other direction. Pulling into Alltech's parking lot, following his ears, he spotted Barton making a run for it. He radioed for help, and the other cops just argued with him like, "No, silly, we're over here at Momentum," until Barton was out of sight. It took police command 30 minutes to realize that they were dealing with 2 separate crime scenes.
What you've heard so far might paint a picture of a character similar to that of Michael Douglas in Falling Down. A hardworking guy that has a really bad day and everything slips. Before you know it, he's unhinged and taking down all who he deems bad guys. It's clear this is what Barton was hoping to project, but his was a pretty flimsy facade. It might seem a bit askew for someone to project an image of a jilted day trader and mass murderer. It's not exactly the kind of reputation most people want to cultivate. But for Barton, it was a last-ditch attempt at being someone he wasn't. Misrepresenting himself is something that has busied Barton his whole life. He tried cool and confident, devoted dad, and high roller. But as he saw it, the jig was up. That week, he hit his limit of how long he could pretend to be okay while juggling insurmountable debts and emotional issues, and not just in the workplace. With Barton on the run, the first stop for investigators was the apartment where he had been living with his wife, Leanne, and 2 children from a previous marriage, 8-year-old Michelle and 11-year-old Matthew. When no one answered the door, police broke it down and entered to find a note left on the table in the living room, typed on Mark Barton letterhead.
July 29th, 1999, 6:38 a.m. To whom it may concern. Leanne is in the master bedroom closet under a blanket. I killed her on Tuesday night. I killed Matthew and Michelle Wednesday night. There may be similarities between these deaths and the death of my first wife, Deborah Spivey. However, I deny killing her and her mother. There's no reason for me to lie now. It just seemed like a quiet way to kill and a relatively painless way to die. There was little pain. All of them were dead in less than 5 minutes. I hit them with a hammer in their sleep and then put them face down in a bathtub to make sure they did not wake up in pain, to make sure they were dead. I am sorry. I wish I didn't. Words cannot tell the agony. Why did I? I've been dying since October. I wake up at night so afraid, so terrified that I couldn't be that afraid while awake. It has taken its toll. I have come to hate this life and this system of things. I have come to have no hope. I killed the children to exchange them for 5 minutes of pain for a lifetime of pain. I forced myself to do it to keep them from suffering so much later. No mother, no father, no relatives. The fears of the father are transferred to the son. It was from my father to me and from me to my son. He already had it, and now to be left alone, I had to take him with me. I killed Leanne because she was one of the main reasons for my demise as I planned to kill the others. I really wish I hadn't killed her now. She really couldn't help it, and I love her so much anyway. I know that Jehovah will take care of all of them in the next life. I'm sure the details don't matter. There's no excuse, no good reason. I'm sure no one would understand. If they could, I wouldn't want them to. I just write these things to say why. Please know that I love Leanne, Matthew, and Michelle with all of my heart. If Jehovah is willing, I would like to see all of them again in the resurrection to have a second chance. I don't plan to live much longer, just long enough to kill as many of the people that greedily sought my destruction. You should kill me if you can. Mark O. Barton.
Mark didn't want to be seen as a family annihilator, so he wrapped it up in one big killing spree and tried to impress that he had simply snapped. That way, he could uphold that he was a victim, too, of the horrible society he had been subjected to, and not one of those psychos who coolly murders after plotting out a crime spree and then covers his tracks. I want to thank This Is Monsters podcast for teaching me the term office avenger. An office avenger is a person who believes that those they work with are secretly working against them. After years of colleagues working to arrange his undoing, he had finally had enough. This is how Mark Barton felt and how he wanted to be perceived. He just lost control. He wasn't a sociopath, not a family annihilator, and most definitely not a serial killer.
But Barton's criminal history tells another story. He'd been arrested twice for drug store robberies when he was younger, and once for a coordinated break-in at the company where he'd once worked as a chemist. At TLC Manufacturing, Mark rose right to the top despite deliberately fucking with his coworkers at every opportunity. He was so paranoid, he recorded all of his phone calls with coworkers. He would change orders from salesmen he didn't like and secretly edit formulas to make colleagues look bad. He seemed to assume that everyone was secretly scheming to sabotage him behind his back like he did to them. Eventually, Barton became president of the company, but he was fired when he was caught transferring TLC's formulas to his personal computer. A week later, a disgruntled Mark Barton broke into TLC, downloaded their client list and other confidential info, and transferred all their formulas to his personal computer. He then wiped the company's hard drives and stole hard copies of the same information from the filing cabinets. Some speculate that while he was there, he also worked to cover his prior theft of company inventory and illegal sales of chemicals for the production of drugs, but who can say for sure? When police opened an investigation, Mark Barton was at the top of their list of possible suspects. When they visited him at home and asked about the burglary, Mark told them he didn't know anything about it. Anyone could have gotten in through the loading dock door, he added, but the cops hadn't said how the burglar entered the building. Mark's wife, Deborah, walked in to see what all the fuss was about, and he explained, "They think I stole the formulas." Again, the cops hadn't said anything about any formulas or what specifically was stolen.
While embarking on his chemistry degree, Barton began manufacturing, using, and selling meth. This isn't shocking when you learn that what sparked his interest in chemistry back in high school was a fascination with LSD. Having learned that morning glory seeds can produce a mild hallucinogenic effect, Barton began treating the seeds with chemicals to enhance that effect. At one point, he overdosed, after which his family has said he was never the same. He was paranoid and hallucinated demons coming through the floorboards. Allegedly, his brain damage was such that he had to learn to read all over again, which he did by studying the Bible. Mark shaved his head and dove into religious fanaticism. He later considered himself to be a Jehovah's Witness. After one semester at university, Mark was hospitalized for a psychotic episode. In 1979, he graduated from the University of South Carolina with a Bachelor of Science. He married Deborah Spivey, his college girlfriend, and the couple had their son, Matthew, in February of 1988. The family lived in Texarkana, Texas, when Mark orchestrated the break-in at his workplace. Ultimately, TLC had the charges against Mark Barton dropped on the condition that he comply with their terms. He had to return the files he had stolen and leave the state of Texas. The Bartons relocated to Macon, Georgia. Their daughter, Michelle, was born in May of 1991. Mark was working as a salesman at a chemical company called Cleantech. He began an affair with a young customer service rep named Leanne Lang, 17 years his junior. They fell in love, and Leanne left her husband. Mark tried to get a $1 million life insurance policy on his wife, Deborah, but soon realized he couldn't afford the premiums. Ultimately, he settled for a $600,000 policy.
On Labor Day weekend in 1993, Deborah and her mother, Eloise, rented an RV for a camping trip in Weiss Lake in Alabama. The two were found at their campsite, hacked to death with a hatchet-like tool, which could very well have been a hammer because the murder weapon was never recovered. Investigators described the murderous attacks as very personal. The only suspect they ever considered was Mark Barton, who claimed he had been at home with his kids while his wife and mother-in-law were murdered. Less than an hour after Deborah's funeral, police were at Barton's home looking for evidence. Despite having a career in chemistry, he claimed he didn't know what luminol was until finally he said, or maybe I've seen it in an episode of Columbo. Luminol showed traces of blood in Mark's car, but investigators felt the car had clearly just been cleaned. Traces of blood aren't enough to arrest a suspect, and Mark, within his rights, declined to provide a blood sample or to allow collection of any of his DNA.
Authorities were convinced Barton was guilty, noting that he would have had plenty of time to put his kids to bed and drive to Alabama to murder his wife and her mother, and then return home before the kids woke up. Plus, a witness recalled seeing a man fitting Mark's description asking for directions to Lake Weiss shortly before the time that the murders took place. Police were also aware of Barton's life insurance policy, and the insurance company moved at a snail's pace when it came to the payout on account of the fact that Mark was a murder suspect. But any evidence they had against Mark was merely circumstantial, and they never had enough to charge him with anything. So the murder cases of Deborah Barton and Eloise Spivey went cold. To this day, despite his continued denial until the day he died, no one believes Mark is innocent in the murders of Deborah and Eloise. Within a week after Deborah's funeral, Leanne was having sleepovers at Mark's house with the kids at home. Leanne's divorce from her husband was final within a month. Within 6 months, she had moved in.
Another would-be mark on Barton's record was when a daycare worker accused him of molesting his then 2-year-old daughter, Michelle. Because of her young age, Michelle wasn't really capable of explaining any details from the alleged encounters. A psychologist evaluated Mark and wasn't able to determine whether he'd molested his daughter. Child and Family Services weren't able to make a determination. Once again, the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. Mark and Leanne married in May of 1995 and moved to Morrow, a suburb of Atlanta. With the payout of Deborah Spivey's life insurance policy, Mark Barton made a major career change and an upgrade to his image when he swapped chemistry for day trading. Though he worked hard to keep up appearances, by most accounts, Mark had always been an incredibly controlling and manipulative husband and father throughout both of his marriages. He hadn't allowed his first wife, Deborah, to work, and he had demanded to know where she was at all times. Once, while he was at work, Mark called home to talk to his second wife, Leanne, and got the machine. Mark's supervisor, Brent, overheard him saying something like, "Leanne, it's just me. You can pick up." And Brent says he got the impression that Mark forbade his wife from answering the phone.
In October of 1998, Mark called Leanne at work and threatened suicide. She heard a loud bang like a gunshot, and then the line went dead. After racing home, fearing the worst, Leanne found her husband on the sofa, perfectly fine. When she asked what the gunshot sound had been, Mark told his wife, "Oh, I killed the cat instead." Mark had shot dead the cat who belonged to his daughter. He buried the cat, then pretended to help Michelle look for her pet for days. Finally, Leanne left Mark in early 1999 and got her own apartment in Stockbridge, another suburb of Atlanta. At the beginning of July, Mark had lost his house and showed up on Leanne's doorstep, begging for her to take him and the children in. She reluctantly let them stay since they had nowhere to go, but she made it clear that she was not interested in reconciliation and had already begun a divorce proceeding against Mark.
On July 26, Barton called his lawyer and had his will amended so that everything would go to his children. On the 27th, he lost another $20,000 in stocks. That night, he beat 26-year-old Leanne to death with a hammer. He hid her body in the closet so his children wouldn't see it and went on as though it never happened. On Wednesday, the 28th, he took Matthew and Michelle for haircuts, and they all went out for a meal. In the middle of the night, he beat both of his children to death in the bedroom they shared with the same hammer he used to kill Leanne the night before. He posed the children's bodies in their beds like they were sleeping, tucked them in tight, and placed a favorite toy on top of each of the children's bodies. "I'm sorry it happened to my sister, but I'm not surprised," Leanne's oldest sister, Dana Reeves, later said. "I felt this has been coming for a couple of years."
In the morning of July 29th, Mark called his lawyer again and changed his will so that everything would go to his mother. He placed the typed letter on the table and left for Buckhead. After fleeing the crime scene, Barton ran through the woods to where he parked his green minivan. Investigators initiated a manhunt, and all of Georgia was on the lookout. Around 4 hours after the shooting attacks, he wound up in Kennesaw, Georgia. There, he harassed and threatened a young girl he planned to hold hostage in order to execute his escape. Instead, the girl broke free and called the police. Authorities soon spotted the van on I-75, and a chase ensued. Upon pulling into a BP gas station in Ackworth, Barton realized he was cornered by 2 police cars. Refusing to go alive, Mark Barton completed suicide by shooting himself in the head in the driver's seat of his 1992 Ford Aerostar, in plain sight of the officers pursuing him.
Mark Barton took the lives of 12 innocent victims that week, as well as his own. Assuming he's guilty in the murder of his first wife and her mother, Barton has killed 15 people altogether. Another dozen lay wounded in hospital wards for days and weeks following his shooting spree, and some never fully recovered, their lives forever changed in the attack. Police found the Glock 9mm and the Colt 45 that had been used in the shooting attacks still in Mark's hands. It appeared that he tried to shoot himself with 2 guns at once. In the van, they found more guns in a duffel bag, including a revolver and .25 caliber semi-automatic and 200 rounds of ammunition. They also found antidepressant pills and a pile of cash.
He tried to project an image of a tortured soul who was pushed to his limit and just exploded. But in reality, Mark Barton was a family annihilator, an office avenger, a mass murderer, a spree killer, a serial killer, and one sick puppy that none of us feel sorry for. A big phony. And above all, a coward for killing himself before he could be properly prosecuted for his crimes.
Wow. I have never heard of this guy. The accidental homemade LSD brain injury is so fascinating.
He ruined himself with that. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I don't know what kind of chemicals he was working with. Of course, that could change everything because, like, a morning glory seed on its own is pretty innocuous, but who knows what he was treating them with or what kind of chemistry he was most interested in pursuing and like, practicing.
What could have gone wrong that it caused an overdose? Like, that's definitely not something to toy with yourself.
Yeah, and I wonder if he had been really hallucinating demons, did he really get over that?
Yeah.
Like, I know that at the time, he had been treated with antipsychotic medication, but there was no word as to whether that had continued at all into his adult life. So, I mean, anything is possible. He certainly was a little bit off with his impression of how he saw himself and a lot of the people around him. So, yeah, who knows what was on his mind? We'll never know.
We'll never know.
The sad part.
And it's like, it's always so interesting to like speculate about minds of serial killers. And, you know, like everybody has like their version of the trio, whether it's like a brain injury, you know, like abuse as a child. And so like, it is interesting to consider, like, was he like born a psychopath? Like, was he possibly like, you know, going to go down not necessarily this road, because there's plenty of psychopaths out there who don't kill and like live very normal lives, like whatever. So it's interesting to think about like if that was like the impetus that pushed him over the edge, or like how much that actually had an impact on his personality, or if he was always a bit volatile.
Yeah, it's interesting also to try to sort of decode his letter, because he said some weird things in there that you're kind of like, what does that even mean? Like part of it where he said like the fears of the father are transferred to the son. It came from my father to me, and then my son already has it. Like, is that a paranoid delusion, or is he talking about the cycles of abuse and he's already fucked it up?
It also sounds a little bit biblical, you know, like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit sort of thing too.
Yeah,
and
he's definitely got some religious thoughts in there. So that could
very
be
interesting.
And it's weird how he would, I mean, obviously, you know, we know he was trying to curate his image, but it is funny, which he even noted, that he would continue to deny his first wife's murder in that letter, even though it makes it more obvious that it was him because of the type of murder that he then committed on his next wife is the same basic thing. So
yeah, maybe some level of like disassociating too, like maybe with some of his mental health struggles, like maybe it felt like a different form of him, or, you know, like, I don't know, like clearly he did it.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, he's definitely like a different person since he received the life insurance payments and changed his career and moved and everything. So he might see that as a different person.
Right.
So what are you watching this week?
You know, I am so far behind on anything true crime related. I got started
because you've been doing real life things out in the world.
No, I've not been doing that. I've been sitting in my room, like, because it's so hot, and it's the only room with an air conditioning in it, even though the air conditioning won't like stay caught up on hot days. But I've been like just sitting, not doing work, not doing anything, watching TV and playing games on my phone. So I have plenty of time to watch true crime things. But instead, I've been watching Southern Charm, a Bravo show. And I like swore I would never watch it because I'm like, it's all like cis straight white people. This must be like super problematic, which like it definitely is. But it's also like very, very engaging. And I ran out of like Bravo shows. I'm like all caught up in all my housewives and stuff. And I was like, some of the guys on that show have been on one of my all-time favorites, which is Summer House. And I'm like, well, if they're on Summer House, how bad can it be? But it's a disaster. And I can't stop, and I won't stop until I'm out of all the episodes. So I will not be watching true crime until I'm caught up on Southern Charm.
So you'll be busy this week too. Next episode, no recommendations.
Yeah. My recommendation for next week is also Southern Charm.
Right.
How about you?
Well, I started watching The Most Hated Man on the Internet, which is a Netflix docu-series about Hunter Moore. And he started a famous and groundbreaking revenge porn website. And basically it was the kind of thing where he wasn't criminally responsible for any of it, because just like Facebook, you know, it's like the people that post their things. It's not him. So he just has the platform. And so he squeaked by on that for a while. But of course, didn't count on some of these people being really dedicated to getting some justice, because obviously, I mean, there's some terrible situations of just women being exploited and like, you know, their parents rooting for them and everything and trying to get their reputation back and heal from this. And it's pretty messed up, all the stuff that he did and just the kind of personality that he was. He was like, I don't care if people get offended. I don't care if I ruin people's lives. That equals more money, right? And like more people watching me. So like that's a good thing in my book. So he's like super creep. And I'm only in the early stages of the show where they're just talking about that website. So I don't know how it sort of panned out in the end, but I'm hoping for terrible shit for this guy.
I hope so too. I can see why he would be the most hated man on the internet. That sounds appropriate.
Yeah. And that's the only true crimey thing I've been watching this week, but I did just see an ad this morning for something that's coming out as this episode comes up. It'll be just a few days from that point. It's called I Just Killed My Dad on Netflix. And it's directed by Skye Borgman, who did Abducted in Plain Sight and Girl in the Picture.
That's right. Those are both very good and interesting.
Yeah. This one explores the psyche of Anthony Templet leading up to June 2019 when he shot his own father to death. And it kind of goes through the journey of his mental and emotional aftermath of that.
Very interesting.
That I'm looking forward to. It's like family secrets, like hidden abuse, and like what all leads up to a person just murdering their father and then turning themselves in.
Right. Very interesting. I'll check that out once I'm caught up on Southern Charm.
In a couple weeks.
I have such a big list now. I do want to give a shout out to Suzanne, a friend and new listener. Thank you so much for the words of encouragement about our show. We so appreciate that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Well, I guess that's enough murder for this week. But if you need just a smidge more murder, you can get your fill on MurderMurder.news, where we post the latest in true crime news every day of the week.
You can also find us on Instagram at MurderMurder.news, on Twitter at MurderNews, on TikTok at MurderMurder.news, and you can find us on Facebook just by searching for MurderMurder.news.
And while you're on Facebook searching for Murder Murder News, you'll also see our group pop up. You'll want to make sure you're a member if you need somewhere to post those gruesome articles and spooky memes where folks will actually appreciate them. And if you want in on our virtual book club. We met to discuss Just Like Mother by Anne Heltzel last Sunday, and now we're getting started on The Murder Rule by Dervla McTiernan. We've also just made our next few book club selections that will take us to the end of October. So check out our Facebook group for more info, and we hope to see some new faces when we meet on Zoom the last Sunday of every month.
Make your random act of kindness by leaving us a rating or 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And make sure you subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you never miss an episode.
Have a great weekend.
Bye, friends. Stay spooky.
Murder, murder.